Okay, it is now 5 o'clock. I will call this committee of the whole meeting to order, and we will start with the land acknowledgement statement. In the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge with respect the history, spirituality, and culture of the Anishinaabe, the people of the Three Fires known as Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi Nation, who have inhabited this land since time immemorial. And further give thanks to the Chippewas of Saugeen and the Chippewas of Nawash, now known as the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, as the traditional keepers of this land. We also recognize the Métis and Inuit whose ancestors shared this land and these waters. May we all, as treaty people, live with respect on this land and live in peace and friendship with all its diverse peoples. And I also have another item that I'd like to read. As we begin tonight's meeting, I would like to acknowledge the importance of this month as we approach the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation on September 30th. It is a time for reflection on Canada's history with Indigenous communities, where we are called to acknowledge the truths of our past, particularly the painful legacy of residential schools, and to take steps toward reconciliation. This month, we are encouraged to explore resources, learn more about our shared history, and listen to the voices of survivors and their lived experience. In Georgian Bluffs, our commitment to this journey is reflected in flying the Every Child Matters flag throughout September, a symbol of our dedication to truth, remembrance, and ongoing support for reconciliation. We encourage our staff, council, and community to be informed about Canada's history and its ongoing impact on Indigenous communities. We also reflect on the significance of the treaties that cover our township land and their continued relevance and impact today. As we move forward, we will continue to share and reflect on our land acknowledgement and work in partnership with Indigenous communities, particularly the Chippewas of Nawash Unceded First Nation and the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation. It is through these relationships that we honor the spirit of reconciliation. Thank you for your time, and may we all take this opportunity to deepen our understanding and commitment to building a future rooted in respect, truth, and collaboration. Thank you to Haley for those very thoughtful words. Our first item is recommendation that the agenda be approved as presented. Are there any additions to tonight's agenda to start with? Seeing none, I will ask for a mover and a seconder. Councillor Schuldeis, Councillor Day. There's no discussion. I will call the vote. All in favor? That is carried. If there's any declaration of pecuniary interest, you may declare at any time throughout the meeting if one should occur. Does any member wish to make an announcement tonight? If none, we will move on to public hearings. Recommendation that the regular meeting of Committee of the Whole be recessed to hold the following public hearings. Number 1, zoning bylaw amendment application Z03-24 for Kevin Kirk. And number 2, zoning bylaw amendment application Z04-24 for Perminder Chatta and Colleen Newell. Can I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Winters, Councillor Schuldeis. Is there any discussion? I will call the vote. All in favor? That is carried. So the first one is Z03-24 for Kevin Kirk. This meeting has been called to consider zoning bylaw amendment application Z03-24 for property legally described as concession 18, lot 21. Madam Clerk, please advise the method by which notice of this public meeting was given.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Notice of this public meeting was given by ordinary mail to all property owners within 120 meters, 400 feet of the subject property, by email to all the prescribed bodies on June 18th, 2024, posted at the subject property and posted on the Township of Georgian Bluffs website. If a person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions to the township before the proposed zoning bylaw is adopted or passed, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision of the township to the local planning appeal tribunal. The person or public body may not be added as a party to the hearing of an appeal before the planning appeal tribunal unless, In the opinion of the tribunal, there are reasonable grounds to add the person or public body as a party.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. And planner, please proceed with your review of the application.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Application B1924 was conditionally approved by the Committee of Adjustment on July 16th, 2024. That application severed an area of approximately 1.5 hectares containing a house and farm buildings that are surplus to the needs of the farmer. 36 hectares was retained for continued agricultural use. To implement this severance, application Z0324, the subject of tonight's public meeting, proposes to recognize a reduced lot area for the retained parcel, a reduced lot frontage for the severed parcel, excuse me, restrict residential uses on a farm lot in the retained parcel associated with a surplus farm dwelling severance, and to require an archaeological assessment for any structural development within 300 meters of Mountain Lake. In terms of comments received so far, here. As the clerk noted, notice of complete application, notice of public hearing was circulated on June 18th, 2024 to various agencies for review. Perry County Planning and Development Services provided comments on July 9th, 2024, and they note that provided Georgian Bluff staffs are satisfied that the applicable criteria for surplus farmhouse severance listed above has been met and the barn is either added to the surplus farmhouse severance or decommissioned, county planning staff have no concerns with the subject application. The Saugeen Ojibwe Nation provided comments on June 27th, 2024, noting that SON requires an archaeological assessment for the property. The proponent should reach out to their office to discuss next steps. The proponent and follow up, the proponent did reach out to SON and is proposing to place a holding provision on retained lands that would ensure that any future development within 300 meters of Mountain Lake would require an archaeological assessment to be completed. Although the proponent has reached out to SON, we're still awaiting clarification from SON to see if that holding provision is acceptable or if they want to move forward with the archaeological assessment. That decision will be reflected in an upcoming report back to council. And Grace Harbor Waters Protection Risk Management Office also provided comments on June 20th, noting no concerns. That's the extent of the comments received thus far.
Thank you. Members of the public registered with the clerk to provide comments in support of or in opposition to the application. I am showing Jenny Brewer and Genevieve Scott from Questa Planning have registered. And I think we have them online. Do you have comments you would like to make?
Good afternoon, Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to speak before the committee. I'm Yanni Brewer from Questa Planning, as you mentioned, and I am the applicant representing the landowner, Mr. Kirk. We concur with the recommendations made by planning staff of the town of Georgian Bluffs. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I also have Amber McCartney, applicant has registered. Amber,
sorry, Amber is not in attendance. She is the landowner's wife, but she wasn't able to make the meeting after all.
Okay, thank you for that. Does council have any questions regarding the proposed application? Okay, seeing none, I will now call for a vote on the motion on the decision. So whereas it has been demonstrated that application Z0324 for Kevin Kirk, which proposes to recognize a reduced lot area and lot frontage for both the retained and severed parcels, restrict residential uses on a farm lot associated with the surplus farm dwelling severance, and place a holding H provision on the retained lands, requiring an archaeological assessment for any structural development within 300 meters of the Mountain Lake, is consistent with the Ontario Planning Act, the provincial policy statement, the Grey County official plan, and the general intent and nature of the Township of Georgian Bluffs zoning bylaw. Now therefore, subject to a review of comments arising at the public meeting, it is recommended that application Z 0324 be approved and the amending bylaw be forwarded to council for adoption. Before I ask for a mover and seconder, we're referencing the holding provision in there, even as we don't know for sure. So we go ahead and vote on this motion and
If I may,
yes,
we can vote on this motion if council so chooses to do so. And then when I bring back the final recommendation report and zoning bylaw, that report and bylaw will provide clarification on the position of SON with the archaeological assessment versus the holding provision.
okay, thank you. So could I have a mover and seconder, please? Councillor Winters, Councillor Scholdice, is there any discussion? Seeing none, I will call the vote. All in favor? That is carried. I will now call for an adjournment for this hearing. Could I have a mover and seconder? Councillor Day? Councillor Scholdice? I'll call the vote now. All in favor? That is carried. This public hearing is now adjourned. Moving on to the next item. This has to do with the Z 04-24 Chatta/Newell. This meeting has been called to consider zoning bylaw amendment application Z 04-24 for property legally described as part of Lot 11, Jones Range, Keppel Township. Madam Clerk, please advise the method by which notice of this public meeting was given.
Thank you, Madam. Notice of this public meeting is given by ordinary mail to all property owners within 120 meters, 400 feet of the subject property by email to all the prescribed bodies on July 31st, 2024, posted at the subject property and posted on the Township of Georgian Bluffs website. If a person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions to the Township of Georgian Bluffs before the proposed zoning bylaw is adopted or passed, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal a decision of the township to the local planning appeal tribunal. The person or public body may not be added as a party to the hearing of an appeal before the local planning appeal tribunal unless, in the opinion of the tribunal, there are reasonable grounds to add the person or public body as a party.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. And Planner, please proceed with your review of the application.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just getting up to the summary. Similar to the current application, this application follows a previous severance application. Applications B01-24, B02-24, and B03-24 were conditionally approved by the Committee of Adjustment on April 16th, 2024. That application created 3 new residential parcels at the southwest corner of Gray Road 1 and Oldman Road. To implement that severance, application 04 proposes to 1, reflect updated mapping provided by the Grace Level Conservation Authority and to add a special provision to the shoreline residential zone for lots 1 and 2 to reduce the access allowance from the 100-year high water floodline from 15 meters to 4 meters. And 2, to add a holding symbol to the shoreline residential zone that would require that site plan agreements are registered on the subject lands to reflect the recommendations of various background studies that were prepared in support of the associated severance applications. I get down to the a little more detail on the zoning amendment itself. The various studies that were referenced are related to the shoreline hazard zoning and the environmental impact studies that were conducted as part of the severance applications, and those impact studies then provided a series of recommendations that will be implemented under the holding provision that would be part of this zoning amendment. In terms of comments received, County of Gray provided comments on August 19th, and they note that County Transportation Services have reviewed the subject application and have no concerns. County planning ecology staff have also reviewed subject applications and have a comment stating that staff find the application acceptable, providing the following mitigation measures recommended within the EIS are adhered to through the holding provision or other planning approvals. And those mitigation measures include one, that the lot generally maintains a surface drainage to Colpies Bay. Proper sediment and erosion control methods shall be installed prior to development commencing and maintained throughout development. Disturbed areas shall be stabilized post-development with native vegetation. Soils planted with native vegetation shall be provided between the lots to maintain storm runoff quality and quantity moving north into the Old Mill Road municipal drain, and local fill shall be used if required. They also are recommending that tree and vegetation removal shall be limited to only what is necessary to accommodate building footprints and access driveways. Tree and vegetation removal shall avoid the bird nesting timelines between April 15th and August 15th of any given year. And a planting plan shall be required that shows all trees proposed for removal that are of a 10 centimeters at diameter breast height size or greater shall be replanted at a 2-to-1 compensation rate with native species. I also recommend that excavation within the shallow groundwater table shall be avoided except for what is necessary to accommodate development. A sediment and erosion control plan be prepared, and impact development infrastructure is also recommended. We also received comments from Greg Galen dated August 23rd, 2024. Mr. Galen is a neighbor. Mr. Galen reports that the planning report authored by Ron Davison on July 2nd, 24 contains erroneous mistaken justification to reduce the 100-year lake flood level setback from 15 meters to 4 meters for habitable main buildings. Planning report refers to supporting information authored by Daryl Robbins, who's a consultant engineer, containing the engineer and Grace email. The consultant's letter only proposes the Gray Salvo Conservation Authority considered a reduction of the proposed 6-meter development setback from the 100-year flood level to 4 meters. Nowhere in the engineer and Gray Salvo Conservation email correspondence exchange is an alteration of the 15-meter setback for habitable main buildings discussed. The discussion is exclusively concerned with the maintenance access from the flood limit. In summary, nothing in the applicant's supporting document justifies changing the 15-meter setback for a habitable main building to a 4-meter setback. I can note that staff, myself, have had discussions with Gray Salvo Conservation Authority staff regarding this. And actually, I too was a little bit confused until I discussed the matter further with Matt Lewis from the Gray Salvo Conservation Authority. And in essence, what is happening on this site is the Daryl Roberts, the consulting engineer, was able to determine a revised 100-year flood line coming from Colpies Bay, and that will be reflected in the updated mapping that will be implementing through the zoning bylaw. Associated with a flood line limit is also something called a wave uprush extent. So you have your static flooding, and then some waves that come up, they'll crash onto the lands and move upwards. That wave uprush extent is typically the 15-meter wave uprush level, at least that setback that we see. In this instance, Old Mill Road is acting as a barrier for the wave uprush. So, so then you think, okay, so we have flood line, and the Old Mill Road is stopping the wave uprush, so we don't need to worry about that. And that's what Conservation Authority basically told me. But, which I didn't know, even if you don't have a wave uprush, so that 15-meter setback, you still have an access setback from the flood line. And that access setback is typically 6 meters from the flood line. And they use that so that they're not building right up against the flood line in an event of a flood where the waters make it to the 100-year flood level. you still have the ability to get around your structures and be able to provide access. So the study has suggested that that 6 meter setback be reduced to 4 meters, and the Conservation Authority accepted that 4 meter setback. So that's where it was a little bit confusing, even for myself, and certainly for Mr. Galen. And through the implementing zoning bylaw, we'll be able to address
Thank you.
that. And as of the authoring, as of the authoring of this report, those were the extent of the comments received.
Thank you. Members of the public registered with the clerk to provide comments in support of or in opposition to the application. I have Megan Edney. Is Megan with us?
Would not appear so.
So does council have any questions regarding the proposed application? Councillor Coburn?
Thank you, Mayor or Chair, I guess, Chair Carlton. Through you, I suppose, to the planner. There is on page 4, I believe it's under the county comments, that the stage 2 assessment would need to be approved by SON and included as a condition of the severance approval. I wonder if you could just make a quick comment in regards to that condition having been met at this point in time, or if that still needs to be included in the recommendations.
Thank you, and through you to Councillor Calder. That those comments are reflective of the comments that we received for the severance application, as well as the zoning. They both came in at the same time, and we have had some. The proponents have had discussions with the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, and that is included as a condition of severance approval. So that condition still needs to be, or is in the process of being addressed. So it's out there. It's just part of the severance application as opposed to part of the zoning.
Thank you.
Councillor James.
I have 2 questions, if I may. I am curious within our planning documents and Great County's planning documents, if there's any consideration for buffer zones around conservation areas or other wild areas and wildlife corridors. These properties do create some access from Bruce Caves Conservation Authority or conservation area right down to the Georgian Bay shoreline. There is a road that the wildlife would have to cross, but there's lots of cover for the creatures. So I don't know if our planning ecologists look at the properties individually or within a broader ecological connection.
And you, Madam Chair, to Councillor Day. Yes, the planning ecologist did look at this in a holistic view. And when you look at the site plan that's associated with the development and the severance application, you'll note that there are areas of where vegetation is being preserved and linkages from the other lands or adjoining lands down to the water have also been recognized and preserved through that vegetative environmental impact study.
Thank you. And if I may, my second question is related. There is a note that the owners agree not to remove any vegetation or otherwise disturb the township Georgian Bluffs shoreline road allowance without prior written approval to the township. And I know this is a big question. That particular section of that bay is one of the last wilder areas along the shoreline, and there has been gradual erosion of the riparian area as a good habitat for those creatures that require both land and water. So I guess I'm just curious about how I know this is a big question in terms of looking at that and monitoring it in the short term, but also in the long run, as properties may change owners, and how do we communicate that to subsequent owners of the property?
So in speaking with this development application, there's the holding provision speaks to site plan agreements that will run with the title of the land, so that if ownership changes, the recommendations that are contained in that site plan agreement will still have effect on the development of these lands in particular. When we're looking at the broad shoreline road allowance and the lands on the other side of Old Mill Road, that's that's beyond this application. So there's really not too much that we can do in this application to impact those lands. But in our own development of our shoreline road policies, I'm sure our CAO will be able to speak to those more, but I'm sure we'll look at those as well.
Yeah, so through you, Chair Carlton. So good question, Councillor Dane, spot on. It can be difficult and has been difficult in the past for us to control activities on the shoreline road allowance. However, we do now have the new bylaw Council adopted earlier on this year, which has a process by which neighbouring owners who wish to make use of the shoreline road allowance adjacent to their property can approach the township and seek permits to do so. Those permits would be reviewed on a case-by-case basis and supported where they align with the intent of the bylaw and the intent that council has shared with us in the conversations so far. That bylaw prohibits the removal of vegetation, prohibits the removal and alteration of the shoreline road allowance in any way, shape or form on a go-forward basis. So in essence, a line in the sand was created when council approved that bylaw, says there should be no further changes to the shoreline vegetation subsequent to passing that bylaw. We have already had some permits come in. The permits relate to infrastructure such as shore wells, their rehabilitation and work to be done on them. And we have had a couple of permits to do with already heavily manicured properties that already essentially are yards on the shoreline road allowance where minor changes have been requested. So we have had some permits come in through that system. I think it is fair to say that we've made it clear to residents in this particular area in the past and through the bylaw continue to stand by the fact that the township is not keen to see whole-scale changes to the shoreline road allowance at this time. We are undertaking a comprehensive body of work to pave out what the future may look like for the shoreline road allowance, but this time we're not supportive of comprehensive changes. So a full devegetation of the shoreline road allowance would not be something which would be currently supported, and we have a bylaw in place to allow us to enforce that. The unfortunate reality, of course, of bylaws is they're only really effective after the fact. So the provisions that Mr. Benner has spoken to and our communication is along the lines of it's at this point property over which the township has care, stewardship and control, and there is to be no material change. We can write to the owners and reinforce that outside of the planning process, just as we have with other owners in the area, to reinforce the fact that we do not wish to see that. That's something the council would like to see us do.
I think it's when property changes hands where people may not be told that by the past homeowner or by their realtor or people who they communicate with along the process. So I almost wonder if when someone has a new property along the shoreline, if they should receive that message.
Through you, Madam Chair, that's something I can't provide an answer to right now. I can look, in theory, we are aware of when property changes hands. So in theory, we could write to property owners when property does change hands. And that's something that I can look to see how practically possible that is for us to implement something like that.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Oh, sorry, Councillor Coburn. I was looking at my notes. Go ahead.
Thank you. Further to Councillor Day's comments, I could be wrong, But I do believe we have always had the requirement for work to be done on our shore road allowances to be approved in writing. I certainly hope that that's applied consistently, as you say, on a go forward basis. I'm just going to ask you to refresh my memory. Planner Benner or CAO Lobley, does that, Niall, you mentioned that unfortunately some of these issues are attended to after the fact, which makes sense. Are there provisions in that newly passed bylaw that would provide for the teeth, quote unquote, that we often hear about from our bylaw team in terms of fines for any alterations made to those environmentally protected parts of our shoreline?
So through you, Madam Chair, to the first point, to date, the township, as the stewards of the shoreline road allowance, as we would with other property, if somebody wanted to make amendments to our property, we would ask that they ask permission before going onto our property and making those amendments. Traditionally, that has happened across the township without permission being granted. The bylaw puts in place a provision which means you need to ask for permission, and if you fail to ask for permission, even if it's something which we would later have supported, there are penalties that can be applied for that. So the bylaw does provide for that written permissive basis to exist and a formal process surrounding that. In regards to the teeth of the bylaw, ultimately teeth of municipal bylaws are tested by the provincial court system. And so, yes, our bylaw contains approved set fines for certain activities. And it enables the township to, in the example that it believes its set fines are not sufficient enough of a penalty to warrant to deter a future occurrence similar to that, we can put a matter before the provincial courts ourselves. And as with any fine in any of our bylaws, if a member of the public who receives one of those fines wishes to appeal it, they can appeal it to the provincial courts, and the provincial courts will ultimately determine whether or not the fine is valid and reasonable in that instance. So yes, we have the teeth. Ultimately, we rely on the provincial courts for the ultimate direction on these ones.
Councillor Day.
Sorry, I think this might be the last question. Anyway, do those teeth include returning the riparian zone to a more natural state?
So through you, Chair Carlton, yes. Again, I caveat that with in theory. I have worked with multiple organisations since I've been in Canada who are in this business one way, shape, or form, and restoration is challenging to achieve. So yes, the teeth are there. Restoration can sometimes be challenging to achieve, and often that is on the basis that restoration may not cause less damage than was done in the first instance. And so all agencies will work together in those sorts of instances. My hope would be that people that move into the shoreline of Georgian Bluffs are coming here to appreciate the here and recognise that the reason the council has endorsed the bylaw to protect our shoreline is to protect the very thing that they're moving here to enjoy. And so my hope would be that people would respect that. And certainly we have bylaws now in place that make it quite clear what isn't acceptable and the ability to enforce it.
Thank you.
Thank you for the excellent questions. Are there any further? Seeing none, I will read the recommendation here. Whereas it has been demonstrated that application Z0424 for Perinder Chadha and Colleen Newell, which proposes to 1, rezone a portion of the subject lands from shoreline residential to environmental protection to reflect updated mapping provided by the Grace Sauble Conservation Authority. And number 2, add a special provision to the shoreline residential zone for lots 1 and 2 to reduce the access allowance from the 100-year high water flood line from 15 meters to 4 meters. And 3, add a holding symbol to the shoreline residential zone that would require that site plan agreements are registered on the subject lands to reflect the recommendations of various background studies that were prepared in support of the associated severance applications. Is consistent with the Ontario Planning Act, the provincial policy statement, the Grey County official plan, and the general intent and nature of the Township of Georgian Bluff zoning bylaw. Now therefore, subject to a review of comments arising at the public meeting, it is recommended that application Z0424 be approved and the amending bylaw be forwarded to council for adoption. Going to have a mover and a seconder, please. So Shawley, Councillor Coburn. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, I will call the vote. All in favor? And I will call for a mover and a seconder to adjourn this meeting. Councillor Winters and Councillor Day, all in favor. This public hearing is now adjourned. Yeah. Delegations and public question period. For items on the agenda, any person who wishes to appear before council regarding an item on the agenda shall make written application to the clerk by 3 p.m. the day of the meeting. To register, go to www.georgianbluffs.ca delegations or call the clerk's office at 519-376-2729, extension 603. And this evening, we have Greg Nickel here with us for Fire Prevention Mid-Year Report. So I'll put the recommendation on the floor first, Greg, and then ask you to speak. The recommendation is that the order of business be amended to consider 9.1.1 CAO 2024-016 Fire Prevention Mid-Year Report 2024 immediately following the delegation by Greg Nickel, appointed Fire Prevention Officer, and that Procedure Bylaw 2019-125 be waived to allow additional time for presentation of the report. Can I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Schuldeis, Councillor Winters. There's no discussion. I will call the vote. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Thank you for your patience, Greg. So go ahead.
Thank you for having me come speak to you about the prevention programs that we've partnered with myself and the Intertownship Fire Department. Not really myself, it's our whole department. It's working with their department and making significant improvements of public education. We've developed really good relationships with the business owners and the residents throughout the Georgian Bluffs area. This program has been going for most of 5 years now. It started with my colleague Matt Bonin, and I jumped in a few years ago. We have a great relationship with Jeff and Andy at the Intertownship Fire Department. Been very well received there. The equipment that we have provided the office area and is working out very well. We do inspections from basically I started at the north end of the township and work my way down, including things like Katy Market, the churches in our community. We do public education in the schools as well as other things that come up. We answer the complaint inspections when needed. We're open to inspecting any public area. And like the report talks about, it says, okay, the Fire Prevention and Fire Protection and Prevention Act says, okay, there are certain things that a municipality have to do. And one of those, and most importantly, is public educational fire prevention. So we do that through the schools. It's a really a key thing that we instruct kids from at Keppel Sarawak. It's been fun to be back there as a former Keppel Sarawak Cougar to be back at that school I went to, the school my kids went to, and be able to provide public education to not only Georgian Bluffs residents, but Owen Sound residents. And a lot of times that happens at the Catholic School Board or Sydenham School, where Owen Sound Fire and Emergency Services is providing public education to kids that don't necessarily live in the city of Owen Sound. In the report, it talked about how many days worked, and that was given to you guys in the middle of July. Since then, we worked another 7 additional days. I'm going to say about another 56 inspections that we completed in those 7 days. And it depends on the day. Sometimes it's a follow-up inspection on the north part of Wyerton, north to Wyerton, which was yesterday. It took most of the morning to get up there and meet with 3 or 4 property owners and have a good relationship with them. And we're seeing success. We're seeing improvements on the properties as we're asking for stuff. We have, like I said, done public education at the schools. We spent a day, our morning at Katy, and offered a touch a truck event, but also spoke a lot about fire prevention, smoke alarms, and just had the opportunity to ask those. So in the last 5 years, our office for myself and my colleague Matt and partnering with some of the guys I work with at the state at our station and through Jeff and Andy. We have inspected just about every commercial property in Georgia Bluffs. If we missed one, it'd be a surprise. And it's been a really good relationship with the people of Georgia Bluffs, business owners of Georgia Bluffs. Been really well received. I go in and introduce myself and tell them what we're there for, have a good conversation, and then we send them a report. We do follow up if there's a major issue, but a lot of times that report will come back to me or our office before the next business day. Other than that, I want to thank the staff in this building as well. It's been great to work with, whether it's bylaw, whether it's building, or whether it's planning. They've been really very, very good to work with as well. So thanks for the opportunity. We look forward to continuing this and whoever is doing this in the future. And we think it's a very question. Any questions about the program that we do?
Councillor Dickey.
Thank you for your work. I know that we don't have a high school in Georgia Bluffs, so I consider the opportunity to help pull a fire truck at OSDSS fun part of my job as a high school teacher. I was wondering, for my question, beyond like setting aside very expensive things for now, is there anything else the municipality can do to help make help fire prevention or coping with fires?
In the future, we're going to see some code changes. We're going to see new building codes, new fire codes coming out. Having access to those, whether it's through the partnership that we have, Owen Sound purchasing and sharing, or Georgian Bluffs putting that line in the budget that says, okay, we need to be able to afford books and standards at times as well. But sometimes, very rarely is there a situation where it's only in Georgian Bluffs, but there's not a lot of farms and a lot of barns in Owen Sound. So sometimes there's some questions out there as to how the rules and things apply. But having codes and standards available or thinking ahead about codes and standards would be important.
Excellent. Any other questions? Councillor Winters.
I want to thank you again, Greg. I mean, it's good reports. It's a great relationship. I'm impressed with the way things are going. Not necessarily through Greg, but maybe through Jeff or to Niall as CAO. As the Georgian Bluffs Council, I think it's important that we see data, we see statistics. It's great to hear that you've done the majority of our commercial buildings. But as council members, I think sitting here, we don't understand what that number is. You know, is it 200? Is it 500? Is it, you know, what percentage are we at? What percentage are we having, you know, compliance with? You know, where is that? And that's important, I think, for our council to understand that we play an important role in this and we lead this role and we need to take more of an exercise in it. So it's more of a, you know, hey, looking for further follow-up report, not for you, Greg, because I appreciate what you do and I respect the Intertownship having served for 10 years there. But I think as a councillor, it's important to us to understand how important fire prevention is, what our role is. We need to see those statistics moving forward.
I can, the touch of the number is, so of the 179, what I do is I have an Excel spreadsheet of inspections I've done over the last years. So I make sure that I'm not missing Mr. Winter's store, right? I can get back. Honestly, we're at 179 of 263 approximately for inspections we do on an annual basis. Now, some of those 263 may be going back to Mr. Winter's store to say, hey, you need to do this or whatever, you've got that stuff done. But I want to say the number is 263 of inspections that I do on an annual basis in the municipality. So that'll be Georgia Bluffs businesses. That's our Children's Bus buildings, including your works departments. That includes large apartment buildings. So Kent residents, the Shadow Lake apartment buildings, the King's condo in Shadow Lake, every commercial place. So if you can walk into it as a person in the general public, we're going in there, making sure that it meets complies with the Ontario Fire Code. There are a couple of smaller spots we go to that would be these duplexes or triplexes that we might inspect. We may notice them for rent on Kijiji or Facebook Marketplace. You see, wait a minute, that place is not something on our schedule. We're going to add that to our schedule. So I'll get those numbers for you through Chief Bucho and Shante.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? I would just add, I heard from one of the local churches that you did a recent inspection on, and they were thrilled with how well everything went and just with you being there and the way you handled it. So thank you very much for doing that for us. So if there's nothing else, then we're moving on, I guess, to the report from Niall.
Thank you.
And I have another recommendation to read that. The next recommendation is that council receive report CAO 2024-016 Fire Prevention Mid-Year Report 2024 for information. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Winters and Councillor Day. And is that what we've just heard? Okay, so I thought we had another report. We moved up there.
I have nothing further to add to the words of Mr. Nichol. Thank you very much. I think we can take on board the points raised and we'll build those into the next report.
Okay, then if there's no further discussion, I will call the vote. All in favor? That's carried. So items not on the agenda, I will just read this for anyone's information in the public. Any person who wishes to appear before council regarding an item not on the agenda may make written application on Thursday preceding the meeting they wish to speak at. To register, go to www.georgianbluffs.ca /delegations or call the clerk's office at 519-376-2729 extension 603. So we have no correspondence. We're on to staff reports from the Office of the CAO. The first one is that council received report CAO 2024-017 regarding Township of Georgian Bluffs Dog Park engagement for information, and that council directs staff to prepare a 2025 budget request for consideration. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Schulmeis, Councillor Day, and turn this over to staff.
We have a fancy new clicker. I will try to make sure I don't break it as we go through today. So thank you ever so much, Mayor Carlton, members of council. I'm here to provide a little bit of an update as requested through the budget process last year, before we get into budget process this year, on some engagement work that was done over the course of the early part of the summer in regards to potential off-leash dog park proposals. So just to go back through, bring us back to why we're doing this in the first instance. So last year, through before budget process and then through the budget process, council considered a request to consider implementing a dog park in the township based on the former athletic fields in Charlotte Lake down near the rail trail corridor. The request had come from members of the Charlotte Lake Business Improvement Committee who had suggested that they would be keen to work in partnership with the township in implementing a dog park down there. And potentially raising half the funds towards an eventual dog park. The idea being that the township would take first steps, representing about 50% of the total costs, and then the community would come in and really make it a pleasant place to be, with the balance of that 50% over subsequent years. It was shared through and discussed at budget period. At that point, council decided not to move forward with it, but asked that a community engagement was done with a perspective for bringing it back for consideration in a future budget. And that's exactly what we're doing tonight. So we undertook a survey. We undertook an engagement process, I should say, during the early summer. It involved both in-person and online opportunities. We had a number of different opportunities for in-person engagements at rounding out at the Connect and Collaborate event at the museum. And we distributed surveys through the Engage GB website. Through that process, we had several hundred people that were engaged in the process, aware that it was going on, and we had 159 responses to the engagement activities that we put on. We promoted it fairly broadly. It's reasonable to say and fair to say that the Charlotte Lake Village Improvement Committee did a good job of circulating it locally as well, and we certainly saw results coming in from across the township. So most of the survey respondents were living in the township. More than 90% came from within the township. And we had a fairly broad cross-section from across the community, although Charlotte Lake did dominate the survey responses by a more significant number overall. And we did make sure that we were hearing from both dog owners and non-dog owners, although obviously a dog park is attractive for one would assume, for pet owners. The fact that the township may be using township property and township tax space for this makes it something which is of interest to a much broader segment. As you can see, the vast majority of responses that we received were through the online survey. It's worth noting, and you've seen this slide before from us as we go through these slides, that the responses that we generated in this instance are not statistically representative. They're not statistically valid. These responses are from people self-selecting to participate in a survey. Generally speaking, what you find when you do a self-selection survey is you find people with fairly strong views. The people that sit in the middle don't really care too much, aren't going to sit down and spend 10 or 15 minutes going through a survey. It's the people that are particularly passionate about seeing a dog park, or the people that are particularly passionate about not seeing a dog park, or the people that are particularly passionate about leaning in to engaging in township processes that are likely to be the respondents. We're not hearing from the people that are sort of the silent majority, as it's often called. It's interesting to note in this survey particularly, as in other surveys we've done, there were different threads. There were some questions which were relevant if you were a dog owner, and some questions which were relevant if you were not a dog owner. And so the percentage results that are reflected in the slide deck and the summary report that we've done are reflective of the percentage numbers of people that participated in that question, not a percentage of the overall question. So people can choose to skip questions or not. And so these percentage answers are a percentage of the people that answered the question. So I'm going to quickly go through this. You've got most of it in front of you. About 2/3 were dog owners, 1/3 were non-dog owners. They came from across the area, but their preference was for an off-leash fenced dog park. We did talk about areas that might not be fenced, off-leash areas which are not fenced, which many municipalities are now implementing. The strong preference was for a fenced-in, leash-free area, with a strong preference for an area which had 2 fenced-in areas. So there was an area for larger dogs and an area for smaller dogs. When we asked people what was important about this, again, not necessarily surprisingly, the most important thing that people responded was that it was fenced and gated. And this is a list in order of priority as to the priority. So the priority is it's fenced, it's gated, it has a grass surface, and there are some shade opportunities in there, and then waste receptacles and various other things followed thereafter. The graph on the right-hand side of the screen there simply shows where people came from. So you can see that people self-selected their communities and came from across the board. Each one of those represents a different community in the township, but the majority of residents were from Shallow Lake, Barmy Beach, and then the Cobble, Kemble, and Spring Mountain area had similar levels of response. Just to give us a sense of driving, we asked how close people would want to be to a dog park. We'll see that in the next slide. But just to give you a quick sense of the sorts of areas, these maps roughly, again, they're not generated by me, they're generated by a free app on Google. But these maps give you a rough indication of how long it would take to drive to Shallow Lake in the middle of the township and Barmy Beach on the graph on the left-hand side in terms of the 2 primary areas of responses. We asked a number of questions about how people would like to access a dog park. People were fairly keen to drive to a dog park as opposed to walk to it, which has always been an interest to me as a dog owner. But people like to drive to a dog park, and they're very happy to drive to a dog park. In fact, we had a large number of people that would be prepared to drive up to 15 minutes or more for a dog park. We did ask around how a dog park should be funded. Whether that comes from the tax base or whether that should be something which is self-funded. There was some willingness to pay. It's fair to say that the willingness to pay was fairly low, but there was a corresponding thread which we'll see in the comments, there was quite a strong commenting thread that this is not something that should be borne by the tax base. So definitely some willingness to pay, but not a willingness to see this as something which would be entirely user funded. There were a number of open-ended comments. We've tried to summarize some of the comments that we heard. So about a third of the respondents were which represented both some dog owners and some non-dog owners. So it's not the same third that answered the same way. This did include some dog owners that expressed some concerns. We had 47 comments that people shared, and they're summarized in these sorts of five broad areas around some concerns that people had around dog parks. We had 30 additional responses that were made to another question around priorities around dog parks. Again, they're reflected here and summarized here. So we definitely saw in the comment threads a much more heavily balanced and blended set of views. There's concerns about funding, concerns about disease, concerns about behavior, concerns about the mixing of dogs, concerns about the costs and the management and maintenance of dog parks. And there were some comments and a number of comments around the fact that Georgian Bluffs is a fairly rural area. We probably have enough space that the township already provides that people can take their dogs to, and trails and so on that they can hike with their dogs. We probably don't need to have another dog park, but there were a number of comments in support. Overall, there was a general consensus that a dog park would be a good thing. There were about 2/3 of respondents were generally in favour of seeing a dog park implemented in the township. However, as I say, there were some significant commentary around some of the concerns that would be expressed. Some of those concerns were concerns that could be addressed through dog park design, but many of those concerns were concerns which are not to do with the actual design of a dog park, but were about whether or not the township actually needs one. If the township were to proceed, there's a clear desire that it would be a fenced-in park with some additional amenities over time. And overall, there was a preference for Shallow Lake, both reflecting the dominance of the Shallow Lake respondents, but also when people were asked about secondary locations, Shallow Lake jumped to the top of that list. And as is noted, with the driving distances, Shallow Lake in the centre of the community offers one of the more accessible locations, although obviously even with that 15-20 minute driving radius, there are still areas of the community that would fall outside of that area. And that really is where we're at today. What we're looking for is any comments, questions there might be around this process, but whether or not council would like this brought back to be considered as part of the budget 2025 process. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions from council?
You should talk about it. Niall talked about it. We should talk about it. I mean, I read the report. It's great. It looks, 159 respondents, very, very low considering the amount of ratepayers that we have in Georgian Bluffs. It's tough to look at that and say, okay, 169 people represent the entire municipality. I have concerns. I mean, I drive by the one at South Bruce Peninsula at the Oliphant Corner, rather. Sorry, excuse me. And I've been by the one in Owen Sound. I've been by the one in Thornbury. And then never at any one point have I seen any more than one dog in a dog park. It looks great. It's a great amenity, but I mean, realistically, I'm here sitting concerned that that's quite a dollar value that funds could be allocated somewhere else. So I need some more convincing that this is going to represent people and we're actually going to get use out of it. It would be awful to see a dog park, a fenced-in dog park built and nobody use it, and then it becomes a burden on the municipality. Is there any way that we can look at other municipalities, and I don't know that there's an answer, of seeing if they can give us an idea of their users, the number of users? I don't want to compare ourselves to Owen Sound, but I mean, Owen Sound population of 20,000 people. What do they estimate the users of the dog park? Blue Mountains, what do you estimate yours? What is that at? I just need some more justification, right? I mean, I think dog parks are great, but I think as Georgian Bluffs Council, we have other priorities as well, right? So that's where I'm at.
The shoulders, you had comments?
Thank you for this report. My question to you is, when we put this off the table there sometime last year, we left it with us saying that we would allow them to have this time to continue to fund from the community. Do we know how, do we have the numbers in front of us, how much more they've raised since that point?
So through you, Mayor Carlton, no, we do not, would be the short answer. I think it's fair to say, I think we see that somewhat in the room today, that the wind was somewhat taken out of the community sails. And so, we would have to go back to the Shallow Lake Village Improvement Committee and see if they were still interested in supporting this, if it was something that was to go forward. At this point, we haven't done that because we needed the direction from council before we got there.
Councillor Colbert.
Thank you, Chair Carlton. I have similar concerns as have been stated. I'm certainly not anti-dog park, but when you take 2/3 of 159, that gets us just over the 100 person mark. And I don't know that that level of support is sufficient to justify $150,000 when we have so many other community needs, recreation and otherwise within our communities. So I was expecting a higher level of support, a higher level of engagement, which tells us something. I think the concerns that were expressed by those folks in the survey that we went over very quickly, I think are valid concerns. And I also think that we need to take a very close look at spending this amount of money at the risk of not being able to spend money on other priorities that we have. We know how tight our budget process was last year, and I don't suspect the upcoming budget deliberations are going to be any easier. I also would suggest that a firm commitment in fundraising by the community members ought to happen before we agree to any upfront costs by the municipality. If I'm not mistaken, that's typically how these things are done. The community shows us a certain level of support in fundraising efforts, and that is a good gauge for us to determine if it's going to be a worthwhile project or not. Thank you.
Yeah.
Might offer a couple of quick comments. So yes, 159 as opposed to a population of approaching 11,000 is fairly it's a fairly small number. It is one of our higher levels of engagement on surveys. So getting many more comments than that is an effort. So it's not an unreasonable. If you compare this to the sorts of feedback we have had on other surveys, this is quite high. This is a fairly high number of pieces of feedback. So I'm not going to try and justify 159 or 100 people being representative of the township. And certainly that is always the problem when you go out and you have engagements, you're asking for the people that have an interest to participate. So I certainly wouldn't want this to be seen as being representative in any way, shape or form, but nor would I want to see this as being viewed as the participation being viewed in a way that more is read into it than anything else. This is a fairly high level of participation compared to some of our other engagements, and it's a fairly reasonable level of engagement. I think to the last point that you raised, Councillor Coburn, one of the things that we left this with was council was not keen on jumping on Shallow Lake as a preferred venue potentially for this until they'd had an opportunity to see the engagement undertaken. And as such, it would be challenging to ask Shallow Lake Village Improvement Committee to raise funds for a dog park if that dog park was then to be directed to be installed in, say, Kemble or Derby. And so I think council has to provide an indication as to whether or not this might be something that is supported before we could have those conversations and have some direction on where they might like to see something implemented before we could go back to the community or seek a wider and different community that might be willing to partner with the township on this. So I make those points simply just to provide some clarity.
Thank you. Councillor Day.
Question. I have two questions that aren't highly related to each other. In the report, there's a statement that off-leash facilities were a priority within the Recreation and Trails Master Plan, featuring 13th on the priority list above boat launches, pickleball, and tennis courts. So amongst other things. So I was just, can you remind us where that data came from and the significance and how heavily to weigh that data?
So yes, I can. I wasn't here when that data was collected. I don't know how that data was collected exactly, but during the development of the recreational and trails, recreation parks and trails, recreation areas, parks and trails.
Recreation and Trails Master
I don't know
Plan.
which one it was, one of those two. There was a survey done, which was, again, I believe there were paper-based versions, online versions, and in-person opportunities to participate in there. I believe there were around about 300 responses in total to that survey. And during that, people were asked to prioritise where they would like to see the township invest in recreation facilities, and that's where that data was drawn from.
And I apologize, I actually realized I had 3 questions. If I may continue, I'm happy to share with the floor. My second question is, the Bruce Trail and conservation areas do not permit off-leash dog activities. Is the rail trail also an off-leash free zone? Do dogs have to be on the leash on the rail trail?
At this point in time, the township of Georgian Bluffs required pets to be leashed on all township property.
Thank you. And then my final question is, it doesn't have to be $150,000. Is there a cheaper version of a dog park that would offer a compromise?
So through you, Mayor Carlton, yes, there is a cheaper version. That's a $75,000 option. So the $75,000 option in essence creates a fenced-in enclosed space, which would have a gate, some trail to get to it, possibly some gravel parking at one side to park, but essentially creates a fenced-in.
So just to throw it out there, without too much support or lack of support for it, it is possible that we could have both numbers, both the number the municipality would provide and the number that the community would fundraise.
Through you, Mayor Colton, could you clarify?
So instead of aiming for the community to fundraise $75,000, we could aim for the community to fundraise half of $75,000, and we could offer half of 70, so $37,500 instead of.
So through you, Mayor Carlton, yes, we could always approach it on that basis. I have worked in dog parks for 30 years and have worked in fenced-in dog parks. The ones that are destined to fail are the ones that are just a fenced-in area, and they fail on the basis that they don't provide a good human experience. And so dogs have humans, at least we hope they do most of the time, and parks which don't have the facilities for the two-legged beast at the other end of the leash normally result in significant complaints. And so there would be a balancing act. As somebody that's been involved in these, it would be my recommendation that you don't simply build a fence in an area for dogs. That would be my professional advice on this.
Thank you.
I also have a couple of questions, and maybe I missed it in the report. Do we know how many of the people who responded were actually from Shallow Lake, or we just know of them as being the township?
It was in the or I think it's 63 were from Shallow Lake. Yeah, 63 were from Shallow Lake.
And did we define in that survey where in Shallow Lake? When people said in Shallow Lake, were they thinking down at the old Ball Diamonds or up at the community center?
So through you, Mayor Carlton, no, not specifically, but there were comments left in both sections around the pros and cons of both locations. So there were some that were very supportive. I think Shallow Lake folks were supportive of seeing it in Shallow Lake. There were comments in support of up at the arena, and there were comments in support of down near the rail trail, and there were rationales given for support for both of those two locations.
Just when I asked that, I'm thinking of what you were saying about providing the experience for the two-legged people as well. And that would be easier to do up at the community center where you've got washrooms, you've got parking facilities, a playground and all of that. So you could provide just the fenced-in enclosure up there and not have to put in all the other increments that are needed to go with it, like a parking lot and such. I see Councillor Coburn has another question. Go ahead.
Thank you. Going back to a comment made about our master recreation and trails master plan, I think it is important for us to cross-reference anything to do with recreation with that plan. We're often criticized by the public for paying lots of money to have master plans done, and then they sit on a shelf and we don't follow along with them. So in going forward, it would be helpful to have reference to that document when we look at some form of recreation, like I suppose a dog park. And further to the comment requesting more data on failed or successful dog parks nearby, I would just ask that we compare apples to apples and look at comparisons that are similar to our own. I say that because I think whoever provided the comment that we are a rural community and there are perhaps alternative spaces for folks to walk their dog compared to people who live within city limits. I think that's an important statement. And if we do look at data, I would hope that we would look at comparable data. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for all those comments. Is there anything else? Counselor Day.
I just in lieu of both what Councillor Coburn and the CAO mentioned, I do feel like before committing $75,000, it would be good to see funds coming in through the community as well and having that update that Councillor Schuldeis asked for. Just to make sure if we did go ahead with this, then we would be working toward a successful dog park.
Thank you for those comments. If there's no others, I will call the vote on the recommendation. So there's no further discussion. I'll call the vote. All in favor? Opposed?
Without more justification, yes.
Do we need then?
I think we do, because I think this is confusing right at the moment,
Yes,
right?
because if this is what we're voting on, do we need to be amending this to be giving the direction that we want going forward?
Yes, so through you, Mayor Carlton, unless direction is given this evening, there is no possibility of this being considered through the early stages at least of budget 2025.
Okay, Councillor Coburn?
I'm sorry, I am at a disadvantage in that I didn't see the results of the vote. I do believe a motion was made and there was a vote, and I'm unaware of what the results of that vote were.
Sorry.
So
So it would have been turned down. So that's why I'm saying if we want to give direction going forward to budget, we perhaps need another motion. Otherwise, this is not going to budget at all this year. So Councillor Winters, did you have a thought in mind there?
Well, I was just gonna suggest, I mean, I don't want to see it dead, because I think we all brought up valid comments and concerns tonight. If there's a way to bring some additional information back, conversation with the community, fundraising group, you know, what is your engagement? What is your desire to see this go through? Is there a way to phase this approach? Here's the data we've gotten from similar organizations, similar municipalities, as Councillor Coburn alluded. I think there's some merit in that. But right now, without having that merit, I would vote as a no. If that merit came back, I would be there very receptive to look at that and move forward. Again, I don't want to see us go down this path where we community engagement, build it, they will come. Not necessarily true. And that's where I'm a little hesitant at this point in time. If there is by far the engagement of the community, the commitment of the community to do it, we look at the data, it supports doing it. Again, like I said, I've driven by and I've made a point of it the last 6 months of driving by dog parks, and I'm not seeing the amount of users that I would expect to see it there. But in support of what the CAO has mentioned, those maybe not have the amenities that the two-legged beasts are looking for. I do see that as a valid point. So I would like some more information before this dies. I don't want to see it die tonight, but I think there's more information that council does.
I'm going to look to the clerk to how do we proceed forward? Because we're receiving the report, but we're wanting further information. CEO?
So I might look to the clerk, because I believe a motion was put on the floor, and I believe a vote was made on that motion.
So we would need to start with a brand new motion.
This would be a new motion as the previous motion has been defeated. So my suggestion would be that council form a direction for information that they would like to see in a subsequent staff report, and that we start from there.
And for clarity, you deferred you voted down bringing it back to budget this year. So it would have to either be brought back after budget conversations have started at a later point of the walk-on budget issue, or it would be subsequent to a further budget conversation another year.
Okay, so the other part of that motion was to receive the report, which we voted down, not receiving the report then. So we really should do part of that. We should have split that one into two pieces, I guess. So should we have one motion to receive the report and then determine in a second motion what we're asking for? And do we still want to see it for budget this year?
Mayor Carlton, I would recommend it be done as one motion to receive the report for information and also to formalize the direction you would like to see in that subsequent staff.
Based on what comments have been made by council, do you have something already? So we're going to maintain the first part that council received report CEO 2024-017 regarding Township of Georgia Bluffs Dog Park engagement for information. And that council request more information on the usage of dog parks. And what else do we want to see in there?
I'd like to know where they're at financially in terms of how much money they've raised since we've deferred them prior. And then as well, I'd like to add my personal take on this is the proposed site of the old ball diamond, Shallow Lake, where it's proposed now, it's not the right spot. I think that the arena in Shallow Lake is a more appropriate spot for this. So that's my take on it.
Yeah.
Just before you form the motion to Mayor Carlton, I have just heard fundraising activities were stopped. Given the direction of last budget cycle with the uncertainty of council's desire for location. So there has been no fundraising activity.
If I would like to propose an alternative. If we are generally not excited about a dog park at this point in time, which I'm pretty sure is due to the difficulties of like all the things we need to do, and knowing that looking ahead to the 2025 budget, there are a lot of things we need to pay for. So I suspect it's primarily a financial decision over not wanting to give constituents what they would like to see in their neighborhoods. Should we just, should we just not support it at this point in time?
And just receive the report
And not create a sense of false hope, and if it is possibly false hope that we're going to get more information and then not approve the dog park.
I suppose, and I agree. I think if we would have heard that they've done a lot of fundraising and are at a certain point, that would have told us something different. It would have given us something, okay, well, we can work toward matching what they've done. But if they've just stopped everything, I think we always intended it would come back kind of this year for budget.
So through you, Mayor Carlton, just for clarity, to recap the conversation from last year, council asked that a report come back and provide a clear indication they were not satisfied with Shallow Lake being the assumed location. And on that basis, without any certainty as to where this might end up, the Shallow Lake Village Improvement Committee did not continue to raise funds because there was no certainty on where this was going to be. So that's why the fundraising stopped. I don't think the fundraising was stopped because there wasn't support for this. I think the fundraising was stopped because we gave direction that we weren't sure that Shallow Lake was the right location.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. Okay, so where are we at on this motion?
Mayor Carlton, I try to craft something resulting from the discussion, but it's completely dependent on whether or not this is being supported in concept. But what I've crafted is that report CAO 2024-017 be received recommendation, and that staff be directed to bring back additional information to council regarding the use and uptake of dog parks in comparable municipalities, and that staff be directed to engage the Shallow Lake Village Improvement Committee to determine the status of any fundraising or interest in fundraising should the program be supported, and that staff be directed to include an analysis for the location of the dog park at the former Shallow Lake Ball Diamond and the Shallow Lake Community Center.
Could I have a mover and a seconder for that? Councillor Winters and Councillor Day. Is there any further discussion? I will call the vote. All in favor? And that is carried. Okay. Moving on to item 9.1.3, the Bruce C. Notice of Commencement of Impact Assessment, our draft response. The recommendation that council direct staff to submit comments on behalf of the township in response to the circulation of the Notice of Commencement of Impact Assessment submission of Bruce C. Initial Project Description. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Shoulders, Councillor Day. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, I will call the vote. All in favor? That's carried. And 9.2.1, CES 2024-015, approval of miscellaneous asphalt patch contractor. The recommendation is that council hereby accepts the quote provided by Multiple Enterprises Incorporated with an upset limit of $80,000 for the supply and installation of miscellaneous asphalt patches in the township of Georgian Bluffs. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Winters and Councillor Coburn. And are you speaking to this one? Perfect. Okay.
You, Mayor Carlton. The staff report was created here based on the budget and purchasing policy requirement to go to contractors to undertake paving works as required. And the township went out with and received 4 quotes and various submission amounts, and Multiple Enterprises Inc. or NEI was the low bid. And staff have, and myself have worked with NEI and multiple agents in the past and seen no reason not to.
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Winters.
If I may, good report, and I totally support this and whatnot. Just as a member of council, it's last 2 years I've been kind of sitting back reflecting. I mean, it's great, Multiple Enterprises. But if somebody were to walk up to me on the street tomorrow and say, who are the other 3 that bid? I don't know. It'd be nice if when we do a report that shows we've got 4 quotes, just the names of the bidders and kind of the ballpark range that, you know, the low was here and the high was here. Just gives us some information. Or are we attracting business to Georgian Bluffs? Are they just throwing numbers out there to do that? And it's not just this report. It's more of an overall encompassing thing there. And if somebody walked up tomorrow and said, so where are we doing asphalt patches? I would say, I have no idea, somewhere in the municipality. Even just a generalization in a report like this with a map, I think would be helpful to us as council. Just, I sometimes feel like I supported it, but I didn't have all the information to support it. And it's just, I think I asked that on behalf of everybody else that's afraid to ask. Just a little bit more information on a report would be great. And there is one little spelling error on here, but I'm not going to show you where it is. Okay. Well, I support it. I think it's great. $80,000 is not a lot of money on asphalt. It doesn't go very far. You know, so, but it would be nice to say, you know, this is road cuts, or we have a little section on Summer Street, or, you know, Fenton or whatever that we're going to do. Just a generalization, I think, would help all of us. That's my only comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments?
I can respond.
Excellent.
So,
Yes.
So I can note we had submissions from Walker, Millers, McDonnell, excavating, as well as NEI, ranging from, it's a little hard to describe without going into detail on unit rates and everything, which most contractors would like to remain confidential. We sit for a patch of 20 square meters. We're in a range of anywhere from about $1,600 to almost 10,000. So it was a big range for these. So we had 4 with that kind of range. As far as where this is, this is, and I could have put more, I guess, detail into this, but this is just for like fixing our sulfur replacements, that kind of small patch, random. Don't know all of the spots yet for this year because culverts fail, all the rest of that kind of stuff. I'm just nailing down the contractor that with this in particular. So yes, they are random in nature. They're not big patches, and mostly for patching up our culvert, water main breaks, etc.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, I will call the vote. All in favor? And that is carried. Moving on to corporate services for the Cholet Stone Grand Opening event. Whereas special events bylaw 47-2013 requires approval of council for events consisting of 1,000 people or more prior to issuance of a special events permit. Now therefore, special events permit 5-2024 be issued to Shoallight Stone for their grand opening event on September 18th, 2024. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Shoaldice, Councillor Day, is there any discussion? Seeing none, I will call the vote. All in favor? That is carried, and I think all of council has been invited to that grand opening. I unfortunately am going to miss that. We have no unfinished business, no new business. Does any member wish to provide a notice of motion? Councillor Winters.
I don't have a notice of motion, but just as a follow-up to, I think, our last meeting in July before our summer break, as we had talked about sending a letter to the waste management contractor, kind of explaining that the township's dissatisfaction with some of the service levels that we provided. Just wondering where we're at on that, whether that's been done or not. Thank you.
Mayor Colton, I can answer that. No, a letter has not been sent. However, we have shared the link to the council meeting with the waste management contractor, so they're aware of the conversation that took place. We have been routinely back and forth with them. We still intend to follow up on that direction and issue a letter.
I think it's important that we do that. That's my recommendation. I mean, it seems we have ongoing issues. It's not a one-off. It seems to be generally every week or every 2 weeks, we have a media release that we've missed something. So I think it's important that as a council member, I'd like to see that.
Carly, and I see Jerry standing back here. Did you have a comment as well?
Just listening.
Okay, Carly, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Carlton. Through you, just per the notice of discussion, it has been included on the next council agenda for
Okay.
discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you. So no notice of motion. I'm not seeing any. Closed session. So the recommendation is that council of the township of Georgian Bluffs move into closed session at 6:25 p.m. in the council chambers with the manager of legislative services / clerk, chief administrative officer, deputy CAO / director of corporate services, and director of development and infrastructure remaining in the room to discuss 13.1 adoption of closed minutes, 13.1.1 special joint all councils meeting, August 8th, 2024, 13.2 a position plan, procedure, criteria, or instruction to be applied to any negotiations carried on or to be carried on by or on behalf of the municipality or board, open meeting exemption K of section 239(2) of the Municipal Act 2001, shared planning service delivery. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Day, Councillor Shoaldice. I will call the vote. All in favor? It's carried. We are now in closed session.
We're gonna have that place
Are we
reopened.
good to go again?
Right.
Thank you, Brian. So council went into closed session under open meeting exemption K of section 239(2) of the Municipal Act 2001. As a result of closed session discussions, 13.1.1, the minutes of the special joint all councils meeting were approved in accordance with the closed session policy, and 13.2, direction was provided to staff. The date of our next regular meeting will be next Wednesday, September 11th at 5 p.m., followed by committee of the whole on September 18th at 5. There's no further business. I will now call for adjournment of this meeting. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Shouldice, Councillor Day, all in favor? Is carried. We are now adjourned. Everyone.